Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me into your community. It's a huge honor to be able to share my experience, my life, and what it's really like for me to work within the sex industry. You know, it's strange. The sex industry is the only industry in which I can sit in a room and have people talk about me all around me. And it's very, very difficult to deal with that. So far, I mean, I'm used to it. So far, for instance, this evening, with the greatest of respect, we've had vector of disease versus seller of beauty. I think I'll take seller of beauty. I prefer that one. So I'll begin by telling you a little bit more about myself. I'm now based in Glasgow. I'm an Irish sex worker with over 20 years experience at various levels within the trade. I'm a mother, a sister, a daughter, a friend. I'm also working towards becoming an academic. I'm working on my second degree at the moment and working towards a PhD in sex work and trafficking. I have a stroppy 15-year-old, and I'm the proud owner of 1 cat and 4 hamsters because I enjoy a challenge. The reason I say that is because I want you to see me as a human being. I am the woman beside you in the queue at the bank getting very irate on my lunch hour. I am the woman in the queue at Asda getting extremely irate with the toddlers behind me. And I have the same feelings, emotions, and day-to-day problems as you do. I'm very sure of that. I've often been accused of being a privileged, white, middle-class, educated journalist. And whilst that's true now, that's not always been the case, not at all. In my past, I've had some very, very dark times, shall we say. I stood on Burlington Road, and my past was the less pretty woman and more band of gold. So I sold sex, and I'm going to be quite, outspoken here because it's important. I sold sex for £30 a time, whilst completely out of my head on cocaine. Now my work has changed a lot. Now I do a lot of advocacy. I'm back in university, and I have just launched legal proceedings in Northern Ireland, which I'll come on to. But it's this myriad of experiences and this background that I have right across the spectrum of the sex industry, which I believe makes me a powerful advocate. Because one of the first things that we come up against as advocates is, oh, you're privileged, you wouldn't know what it's like to suffer in the sex trade. Believe me, I do. I've been there. So tonight I've been asked to speak specifically about decriminalization. And I'll talk about Northern Ireland firstly. The situation in Northern Ireland is that they passed the Swedish Model in June of this year, the 1st of June of last year, sorry, I beg your pardon. Now to explain, the Swedish Model is a form of criminalization in which it's made illegal for a man to pay me, but it's still legal for me to sell and still legal for me to advertise. And the thinking behind it is that it will gradually reduce demand and so completely eradicate prostitution. We know that as a model that is an abject failure. We've just heard from Sashin, very interesting discussion by the way, which I would love a copy of, about how prostitution goes right back to Mesopotamia and to ancient Greece. And how the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland think they're suddenly going to be able to eradicate prostitution with one bill, many thousands of years later, is beyond me, but there we have it. So, up until 2 years ago, the industry in Northern Ireland was working fairly well. The Police Service of Northern Ireland would only take action and raid premises where it was felt that there was underage sex workers, evidence of coercion, evidence of trafficking, or a link to organised crime or drugs. On the whole, independent sex workers, and that includes myself, who form the majority of the trade, we were left to get on in peace with our work, and we had a great relationship with the police. All that changed when the Irish NGO sector sat down with the Democratic Unionist Party. And I mention this now because I'm seeing this happening right now through England and Wales. There are a lot of organisations that stand to make a lot of money out of criminalisation. You must understand that. And they heavily campaign against what I campaign for. So these NGO organisations convinced Lord Morrow that trafficking was rife in Ireland, It's not. And that were he to criminalise the purchase of sex, that he would potentially save all these sex slaves from their destiny of a life of absolute desolation. Now, the first important thing to say is that trafficking is already an offence. It's always been an offence. Rape is already an offence. Sex with a minor is already an offence. Taking a person against their will or holding them against their will is already an offence. But no, he pushed this law through because it was his solution to trafficking. What he was actually doing was targeting consenting adults, and he was doing that from a moralistic point of view. All good law should be based on evidence, and the evidence for decriminalisation comes to us from around the world. It comes from the World Health Organization, from UNAIDS, from The Lancet, but more recently from Amnesty International after an in-depth 2-year analysis of the worldwide sex trade. But more importantly, it comes from sex workers ourselves. The Department of Justice in Queen's University Belfast issued a report in which 98% of sex workers in Northern Ireland said they didn't want further criminalisation. Still, they pushed it through. Here is something key which I need to deliver to you with regard to decriminalisation. Even prior to the law change in Northern Ireland, and now in England and Wales, and certainly in Scotland, we are not permitted to work together for safety. So, you'll hear, for example, Mr. Bannister talk about the brothel keeping laws, and that's quite right. It is completely against the law. And obviously, none of us in the sex trade, myself in particular, want to see anybody suffer. We don't want to see anybody under coercion or working against their will or being made to do anything they don't want to do. We want to work with frontline forces to make sure that doesn't happen. And actually, as current sex workers, now, we're best placed to spot that. But if you pass a law which makes it illegal for the guy to pay, then sometimes, if you think about this logically, if a woman is being coerced and being made to suffer within a brothel, the only other person who'll come across her, other than her handlers or traffickers, shall we say, will be clients. Now, do you think clients are going to go forward to the police and say, hey, I was at an apartment at London Road and there was a girl there, I'm not happy with what I saw, I think you guys should go and investigate? No, because now they're going to be admitting to committing an offence. So that's crucial. Thank you. So, in the UK, I cannot think of any other single occupation which compels a woman to work on her own. Not one. You would not ask a nurse to work a Friday night shift on her own, so don't ask us to work alone. Legislators enforcing us to work on our own, legislators are sending out a message that they don't care about us, in spite of being the first ones to deem us as vulnerable victims. They are also positioning us as sitting ducks for violent attacks. So what do I mean by that? The vast majority of attacks on sex workers are not done by clients, actually. They're done by opportunistic criminals who know that we are forced to work on our own and know that we're highly unlikely to go forward and report crime to the police. In a decriminalised environment, we can work together for safety without the necessity for a pimp. So we can form cooperatives of women working together to keep each other safe. And I'm talking about 2 to 3 middle-aged women working in an apartment. And that, in turn, sends out a message, first of all, to would-be attackers that actually we are there to keep each other safe and we will report crime. But it also goes a long way to reducing the stigma around what we do as well. So what are the advantages of decriminalisation then? Decriminalisation, we know, respect for our human rights and our dignity increases. So, for example, in New Zealand, where they brought in decriminalisation in 2003, last year saw the first instance of a sex worker take a case under her human rights legislation, her labour rights, against her employer in court, and she won. She won many thousands of dollars. And that's where we want to get to in the UK, that we just have the same rights as you guys, that you enjoy every day in work and that you take for granted. We don't have those rights. We know that decriminalisation increases our access to justice, so we know that in a decriminalised environment we're far more likely to go forward to report attacks and to see that those reports see all the way through the justice system as well, to go and give evidence against our attackers, because we're not afraid of recriminations afterwards. It promotes safer working conditions for us. It challenges stigma and it challenges discrimination as well. It's one of the reasons that I speak out and I do what I do, is because I think the stigma is a real challenge. Everybody has in their own mind what their idea of a sex worker stroke prostitute is, and it's never me. So it's always either the fabulous, glamorous escort that's flown around the world for thousands of dollars by a Dubai prince, or it's a woman standing on a street corner, shivering, waiting on her next hit or whatever. Actually, the reality is pretty boring. 70% of sex workers in the UK right now are mothers, and we are working to feed our children in times of austerity, in times of cuts, in times of bedroom tax, and we are simply trying to put food on the table, as is our role as mothers. Failure to listen to us, to our needs, our lived experiences and recommendations of us as sex workers leads to bad policy making. After all, we are experts on our own lives and our own industry. There's a teaching in Hindu which I firmly believe in, and it is this: that truth is eternal. My truth is eternal, and so it must be spoken, as it counteracts the many myths such as trafficking, underage, pimping, rape, all of which are already offences. My truth is that I know what happens when further punitive laws are brought in and the damage that they do. I remember when the 1993 Act came in the Republic of Ireland. Up until then, we were working in a decriminalised state. We had an amazing relationship with the police, and we knew that they were looking out for us. I was working in the red light district, and it was rough. It was coming up to Christmas, and it was standing room only, because the women were out getting money for toys for Santa. We begged the police for a moratorium of 6 months when the law came in, and eventually they agreed, because we knew what was coming. Precious police resources were diverted away from looking after us at our place of work, which was on street, to chasing down clients and arresting them for curb crawling. And the rates of violence went through the roof. The body of Sinead Kelly was found by the canal. She was 21 years of age. She stood 500 yards from where I used to stand. It could have been any one of us. Melinda Pereira, a young student, was bludgeoned to death in a Dublin apartment, working for the same agency many of us had. You see, I was a law student back then, and those women, they asked me to help them. They asked me to challenge this law that was making their lives so unbearable, which is why I have raised proceedings in the High Court in Northern Ireland to challenge the law there, which is coming up in September. Thank you. Unfortunately, in 1993, I couldn't do a thing about it. I was absolutely helpless. My hands were tied. But I'm damned if I'll give up on them now, and I thank you for listening to me.